Days after Chinese Premier Li Keqiang traveled to Delhi, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe called on India to join a new maritime security structure, an idea many believe is aimed at circling China.
A natural and indispensable partner. High praise for Japan from Indian Prime Minister Singh. The two nations have agreed to boost political dialogue, strategic consultation and defensive ties. They've also finalised a controversial deal on military hardware.
The Japanese government has offered to sell the US-2 amphibian aircraft to India. This has been reported already. This is one of the few occasions where Japan has offered to sell such dual-use equipment with both military and civilian applications to a foreign country.
It's the first time India has brought military hardware from Japan. It's also Tokyo's first sale of military hardware since Japan banned arms exports in 1967. The US-2 planes are designed and built in Japan and are currently being used by Japan's self-defense force. But India says the planes will only be used for search and rescue missions, making the deal technically non-military and legal under Japanese law. Maritime security was another area where the two powers have big plans for the future. Abe is calling on Japan, India, Australia and the US to jointly form a so-called Democratic Security Diamond. It's a call India seems to be answering.
We should therefore uphold the principles of freedom of navigation and unimpeded lawful commerce in accordance with international law.
Many see this proposed alliance as a move against China. About 2 weeks ago, Chinese Premier Li Keqiang was in India on a trip that was widely hailed as a success. But despite this, many say Singh's Tokyo visit was a show of unity over territorial disputes with China. It's not just India that Abe has been courting. Last week he was in Myanmar, where he signed a $504 million loan agreement and cancelled $1.7 billion of debt. But while some Chinese news media were full of commentaries decrying attempts to encircle the country, the official response has been more cautious.
We hope that China's neighboring countries would develop normal state-to-state relations. The development of India-Japan relations could be conducive to regional peace, stability and development.
Three great powers with three great agendas. China, India and Japan each have their own ambitions and their own security concerns that are shaping the region. But it remains to be seen if they can all get what they want.
With us today talking about this trio of Asian powers are from Delhi, Manvendra Singh, from the former Indian Member of Parliament who was on the country's Parliamentary Standing Committee for Defense, and from Tokyo, Takashi Asano from the Tokyo Foundation. And here in Beijing, we have Mr. Ye Hailin from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Gentlemen, welcome to World Insight. Mr. Ye, as we have heard from the background report, there have been suspicions from China whether the actions taken by Japan recently diplomatically, particularly the visit by the Indian Prime Minister to Japan and their agreements with one another, is an action about encircling China. But my question really is, Mr. Ye, yes, is China overly sensitive about everything diplomatically Japan has been doing over the past few months?
I would like to argue that the whole region is oversensitive to any big power in this region. Actually, not only China. Yes, we can say that as mass media in Chinese sometimes is overreact because the bad news run fast. It's a mass media. But on the other hand, we also should admit this region, Asia and the Pacific, including the Indian Ocean, there is no regional structure to maintain the stability and the security. So every country is had to react on this own judgment. That means we already make our pre-judgment on the other country's action. This means that we always overestimate the another country's intention, especially the negative intention towards our own selves. We
are getting quite suspicious of one another. That is the problem. Having said that, though, Mr. Singh, what exactly is the nature, reached the agreement between the two sides, Japan and India, about what you call the Indo-Pacific Strategic Axis on maritime security. Explain to us, what does it mean for the others?
I think being the two largest democracies in Asia, the two oldest democracies in Asia, there have been a commonality of interest between between Japan and India for a few years. And I think the re-election of Prime Minister Abe has made this slightly more forward-looking, because he's been more active on India for most of his political career. And the future interest lies in greater commerce, trade, interaction, and the world is getting more globalized in any case. And I think the belief that sea language communication should remain open, secure, unimpeded by any country, big or small. And I think that's the real crux of the matter here.
All right. I certainly understand your point, but on the other hand, sir, it seems we are having a very different story from being described by you, because this time Japan is very much likely to purchase some of the US-2 amphibious aircraft coming from India. This will be the very first time Japan purchased weapons, but certainly it's being used another name, a civilian name. So many wonder what is the nature.
Buying the aircraft from Japan.
Yeah, the other way around. So what is the nature of the relation? Yes, of the relations. What does the military tie mean for the two countries?
I think the sale of these aircraft has no military value either to Japan or to India, because they don't have a combat potential, and they will certainly not be used in combat. There is a huge problem that India faces in its maritime security within the Indian Ocean region. We've had a terrorist attack in Mumbai, which came by sea, and we need greater surveillance, greater access to the seas through aviation means and also surface means. And I think if this aircraft fits the bill, it should be purchased. But I'm not sure if it fits the bill. That process has to be decided by the Air Force on a technical basis.
Mr. Asano, your input here, what do you think has the nature of relations between Japan and India been evolving, particularly this time with the visit of the Indian Prime Minister Singh to Tokyo?
You used the word strategic axis. Actually, it's a strategic and global partnership between Japan and India.
All right.
The word axis invokes a certain image. Axis Vivo by Bush 43 or Tripartite Pact of 1940. But that is not the case here.
Word is one thing. What exactly is the meaning of it is even more important. What do you think is the nature, the real nature of it?
It is, from Japan's perspective, through this close bilateral relations, we're asking our Indian friends to be committed in our search for a new governance structure, political and economic governance structure in East Asia.
A governance structure. Mr. Ye, what is your understanding of that governance structure coming into being?
We always had this when Japan and India evolved cooperation, they always used, they have the common values, the similar governance structure. But in my understanding, actually, this is based on some similar intentions. I would like to argue that encircling is a very big word. It's always connected to the coalition, ally, axis. But we should pay more attention on what they really can do. If they have this intention, we can notice that no matter in Japan or in India, there's someone always argue that Japan and India should set up the coalition to anti-China or something like this. But in the matter of fact, if they have the similar intention, what they really can do, what they really can sacrifice their own interest to fulfill another country's demand to so-called encircle China, it's very difficult. It's beyond the government structure or any actual interest of the Indian and Japan.
So you think, did I understand right, Mr. Ye, that some people are overreactive to what
I think
which is going
among
on?
the Indian, China, and Japan, there always someone is overreactive to the another two countries or another one countries.
Well, let's also have Mr. Singh to join us. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think there's a point. I think people do tend to overreact and get a bit hyper about any small gesture. The argument that India cannot be in the Pacific because it's far away. That's the world is so integrated, and you have common interests, and there are common plans for the future, which for everybody's benefit. And I think to be too hyper about it is to miss the larger picture and look for the negative angles, as the speaker from Beijing quite rightly said.
Let's take a look at how these Asian powers perceive each other, at least how they perceive each other according to the press coming from different countries. These, of course, is how they look at each other when it comes to regional security.
China believes the U.S. is building up its relationships with Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Myanmar, and now India. India thinks it's the one being surrounded by China in the east and Beijing's longtime ally Pakistan in the west. Then there's Japan, that's been raising alarms about what they see as aggressive moves by China in the East China Sea.
All right, Mr. Singh, your comment?
Well, I think these are hyperboles that can be used in any way. There are people who think that China's construction of a port in Pakistan called Gwadar, that is encirclement. But I think India is too large to be encircled, and I think China is too large to be encircled.
However, when it comes to Mr. Asano, your country, Japan, maybe things are a little bit different, let's say from India's case, because Japan's neighbors, South Korea, DPRK, China, as well as Russia, have been in the territorial disputes with your country. And people are suspicious of Japan because of the Second World War history. So what exactly is Japan having in mind going around the region forming partnerships?
Of course, I'm in no position to defend. I don't need to defend the position of my government, but Japan is going around the country to strengthen the partnership to bring prosperity and peace to East Asia. And the history issue that you mentioned is, of course, needs to be worked out. But if you're asking, Chinese and Japanese and Indian eagle can coexist in this global, in this world, then answer is apparently no if you have an 18th, 19th century perspective on the global affairs. But for good or bad, we live in a complex world. And I believe in Singapore at Shangri-La Dialogue, Lieutenant General Chi Jiangbo mentioned that we need to get rid of this Cold War mentality, and I personally do agree with that.
Getting rid of the Cold War mentality, does that equal to not facing up to the history, sir, Mr. Asano?
We all need to face up to history.
Well, I think politicians have to provide leadership, and I think the prime example is the politicians of Europe, who, despite a complex history, as you keep stressing on history, Europeans have a very complex history, far more bitter and brutal than any Asians could ever have. Despite that, they've overridden those divisions, and they made a remarkable political, security, economic union. And I think that's the goal Asians should have for the future, because the history is Asian and the future is Asian.
Mr. Singh, is it far from us?
What is far from us?
Is that goal, that blueprint you have just demonstrated, far from us? What does it take to get there?
I think it takes greater vision, greater leadership to get there, and I think the leadership is still lacking in Asia. But I think the attempts are there, and I think once we override those suspicions, have greater transparency between each other, I think the goal is achievable. Because don't forget that until 200-300 years ago, Asia was integrated far more than what Europe is integrated today. But we've had problems because of colonialism, and we have to override those problems.
Mr. Ye?
I think maybe it's not the best moment for the Japan, and India, and China to seeking for a very comprehensive arrangement between among these three countries, also so-called package deal on the bilateral issues. I think now currently we can focus on the issue by issue or the case by case, for something easier to the something more difficulties. I think we can focus on something more practical. For example, the freedom navigation. Japan, India has something in common, but also China is appeal for the navigation freedom. So in Indian Ocean, in the South China Sea, we have the common interest. We can work together. It's many things we can do, but before this, we can make the difference between something we can't because we have the interest dispute or something we can't. We just a lack of the common understanding.